I never expected my family to cross this line. They had always been loud, opinionated, and traditional in their views, but this time, this was different. The words they spoke weren't just disapproval, they were an attack on my very identity. It started with a casual dinner, an evening that had the promise of being normal, like any other. But as soon as the conversation turned to my career in art studio, I felt the familiar tension in the air, only this time it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "Why do you waste all this space?" My father's voice rang out with a finality that sent a chill down my spine. He was the first to speak up, his tone accusatory. The others, my mother and sister, sat in silence, but their expressions told me they were in agreement. "Your art won't make you rich, and it sure as hell won't bring you respect. You need to start living in the real world." I could feel my pulse quickening, but I refused to let the anger take over. This wasn't just about art anymore. It wasn't even about the studio. This was about them trying to strip away everything that made me me, my passion, my purpose. My mother, who usually took a more subtle approach, chimed in next. "You've outgrown this." Her words stung with a mixture of disappointment and authority. "Your father's right. We need to make better use of the space." I was thinking of turning the studio into a guest room, or maybe even a space for extra storage. "We're running out of room for all the family's things." Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. They had clearly planned this. They wanted my studio, and they were no longer asking for my consent, they were demanding it. "You want me to give up my studio?" I whispered, my voice barely audible as I stared at the three of them, sitting across from me at the dinner table, like a council passing judgment on my life. "This is my space. It's the one place where I can breathe. You can't just take it from me." My father shook his head, the look in his eyes as cold as the night. "You can't live in a fantasy world forever. Your art won't pay the bills, won't get you anywhere. You need to stop being so selfish and think about what's best for the family." I felt the familiar knot of frustration and helplessness tighten in my chest. It wasn't about the space anymore. They weren't just attacking my work, they were attacking me, my passion, everything that defined me. I had spent years building that studio, every inch of it was a reflection of my heart and soul. I couldn't let them take that from me. But the more I fought back, the more they pushed. The more I explained that this was my path, my dream, my future, the more they tried to convince me that it was time to give up. "We're trying to help you," my mother added, softer now, almost pleading. "We want what's best for you. But we can't keep watching you waste your life in a room full of paint and canvas. This is a practical decision." A cold, bitter laugh bubbled up inside me. They wanted to help me? No, this wasn't about helping me. This was about them taking control of my life, like they always had. They were comfortable with their expectations for me, the daughter who would settle down, take a real job, and conform to their version of success. But I wasn't that person. And I wasn't going to pretend to be. As the conversation escalated, I realized something: their refusal to understand my passion wasn't just about them wanting me to be practical. It was about control. They had always held the reins in our family, always dictated the terms of my life, and now they wanted to do the same with my art. It felt suffocating. I knew I couldn't let them take away my studio, but I couldn't just yell at them either. That wasn't who I was. So, I took a deep breath and stood up. "I won't give up my studio. I won't let you take the one thing that makes me feel alive." My father's face twisted with anger. "You're being unreasonable." "Am I?" I said, my voice shaking now. "I've given up so much for this family, my time, my energy, my hopes and dreams. And all I ask for is a little space to be who I am. Is that really too much to ask?" I walked out of the room before they could answer. Their voices followed me down the hall, but I couldn't listen anymore. I went straight to my studio and locked the door behind me. I needed time to think. Time to figure out how to handle this. The night after the confrontation, I couldn't sleep. The silence in the house was deafening. My family's demands had hit me like a freight train, knocking the wind out of me. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the look on my father's face as he insisted that I give up my art studio. The words they had used still echoed in my mind. "You're wasting space," my father had said. "You need to stop being selfish and start thinking about what's best for the family." And my mother's calm, practiced tone as she suggested converting the studio into a guest room. It was all too much. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had built my art studio from the ground up. Every inch of the room held memories, paintings I'd worked on late into the night, sketches of dreams I was still trying to bring to life, and the comforting mess of paints and brushes that had become my sanctuary. It wasn't just a room, it was my soul's reflection. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't about the studio anymore. It was about control. My parents had always wanted to shape my life into something they could understand, something they could be proud of. They had pushed me to follow their version of success, a version that didn't include late nights spent painting or the uncertainty of an artist's life. They wanted me to fit into their mold, and the studio, my personal space, was the final reminder of my refusal to conform. I knew I couldn't give it up, but I also knew that fighting them wasn't going to work. They wouldn't understand. They had never understood. This was the moment when I had to take a stand, when I had to show them that my art wasn't just something I did, it was who I was. And I wasn't going to let them take that away from me. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity that I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't need to beg or argue. I didn't need to shout or explain. If they wanted the studio so badly, I would give it to them. But not in the way they expected. I grabbed my phone and sent a simple message to my parents and sister: "We need to talk. I'm giving you what you want, but on my terms." Then, without another word, I walked to my studio. The sun was just rising, and the golden light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. I had always loved the mornings in my studio. There was something about the quiet of the world outside that made it feel like anything was possible. But today, there was no peace. The weight of the decision ahead of me loomed over me like a storm cloud. I took a deep breath and began to work. I spent the entire day clearing out the room. It was harder than I expected. Each piece of art I packed away felt like a part of myself being erased. But this wasn't about the art. It was about sending a message. I was going to give them the studio, but it would be empty. It would be nothing. I would take away every reminder of the person they wanted me to be, the person who followed their rules and lived up to their expectations. By the time my family came home that evening, the studio was bare. The canvases, brushes, and supplies were gone, replaced only by the cold, empty walls. I left one thing in the room, an unfinished canvas, the last piece I had worked on, half-painted and still waiting to be completed. As I sat in the living room waiting for them to arrive, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't upset. I had made my decision. I was ready for whatever came next. They walked into the room together, their faces expectant. My father was the first to speak, his eyes scanning the empty space with confusion. "What is this?" His voice was flat, a tone of disbelief edging the words. "Where is everything?" "I gave you the studio," I said, standing up and facing them. "But I didn't give you my art. You can have the space, but not what it represents." They stood there, motionless, for what felt like hours. My father's face twisted in anger. "You can't just give up everything you've worked for," he said, his voice rising now. "Do you know how much this costs us? The time, the effort, the money we've spent on this house? And you just clear it out, like it means nothing to you?" "It means everything to me," I said quietly, my voice firm. "That's why I can't let you have it. I can't let you take what's mine." "You're being unreasonable," my father snapped. "You've thrown everything away for a pipe dream. You're not a child anymore. You need to start acting like an adult." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth was in front of all of us. They didn't understand me, and they never would. And I realized, as I stood there, watching the disappointment in their eyes, that it didn't matter anymore. I had made my choice. I had given them what they wanted, but not in the way they expected. The studio was now a blank canvas, and they had no idea how to fill it. My sister was the first to speak. "You really did it," she said, her voice soft. "You cleared out everything." I nodded, my heart heavy. I had to. I had to do it this way. I couldn't just give it up. I had to make a statement. "You're not going to fight for it?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "No," I said. "I don't need to. This is my fight. And I've already won." They stared at me for a long time, the silence thick with the weight of unspoken words. Finally, my father turned and walked out of the room, muttering something under his breath. My mother followed, but my sister stayed behind. She looked at me for a long time, her eyes softening. "I don't get it," she said quietly. "But I think I understand you a little better now." I didn't answer. Instead, I turned back to the unfinished canvas in the corner of the room. It was a piece I had never intended to finish. But now, looking at it, I knew what it meant. It was the one thing they hadn't taken from me. It was my choice. My voice. My art. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.